Hello and welcome along to the Panto podcast. It's so good to be back for this Panto season, and for the next 12 weeks I'll be spreading the Christmas pantomime cheer with some truly amazing guests. There might be some more as well added on at the end, depending on restrictions, so we'll let you know how things go. I would just like to thank as well everyone who's taken part in this series, who's helped to organise, and to those who aren't in this series, but have agreed to be in future episodes. And can I please ask you as well to subscribe and to share on the social media as well, so we can share these stories with a bigger range of people. This weekend, it's a double bill, with another great episode coming out this Sunday morning. So, back to this week's episode. Basil Brush has been part of British life since 1962, and has appeared in countless pantomimes, and is a true national treasure. Given the strange times as well, we actually recorded this episode in the Panto van. I would like to thank Michael Windsor and Jonathan Owen for their help with this episode, so please, after all this time, sit back and enjoy the latest Panto podcast. Well, hello and welcome along to the Panto podcast. My guest for this week is Basil Brush, national icon.
Hello, 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 hello. This is nice and comfy, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Sitting in your little van, hey, while we're all on the road. This is splendid to talk Panto. Brilliant.
Yes, well, I'm very, very pleased to have you in the van and very pleased to be in these strange surroundings today. The situation then with Basil.
Yes?
When you were a little boy, did you want to be a star?
Well, people used to say I was born on stage, so my mother kept it in the act. Kept it in the act. You see what I did then? So no, was I destined to be stardom? I suppose, really, it wasn't until I was with David Nixon that I knew I sort of had a little talent for telling very, very terrible jokes and make people laugh with adding a boom boom at the end. So it was wonderful. David Nixon 1963 when I was on his programme. And it wasn't really until about 5 years later that I had my own Basil Brush show as sort of a spin-off. You know, the way that people like Cheers have a spin-off. Frasier has a spin-off programme. You know, and I was able to do the Basil Brush show with Mr. Billy, Mr. Roy, Mr. Derek, all of those, and suddenly became a household fox, you know, the fabulous fox on the box.
And what about pantomime then?
Well, pantomime didn't come immediately. I mean, of course, in those days, pantomimes were massive events with just about every single celebrity going. I mean, the pantos then came along where I was really taking part in variety shows. Pantos weren't just pantos in those days. They were sort of variety shows. Well, very much like the pantomime that we've got at the Palladium at the moment. You know, everybody coming on, you've got the story, but everybody comes along and does their bit as well. Huge extravaganzas. And it was, in fact, just over 50 years ago that I was at the London Palladium with Cilla Black, Leslie Crowther, in a huge pantomime. And it was sort of the first time that I became much more integral into the story as well. I think it was Aladdin that we did then. And it was massive and spectacular. Whereas before, I used to do just little inserts in a show featuring Basil Brush. You know, I might be Aladdin or something like that. And not Aladdin, I mean the genie, and just crop up in the cave and do a little bit. You know, but now I'm much more integral to the story. But of course, the biggest one I remember, and the poster is still there, is my good self with Cilla Black. And the funny thing was, she was actually pregnant at the time. And there was a picture of her, and it was nothing to do with me. She was just Ginger herself, nothing to do with my good self. But it was wonderful. I had all these publicity pictures taken outside. They were massive events in those days. And of course, things change nowadays. Pantomime's got a little bit smaller, and they're big events. So I'm thrilled that Kudos have got the Palladium back on, because that's a great home for pantomime.
How was the Palladium that first time you performed there?
I mean, it's funny if I can remember that far back. They were huge events in those days. And there were so many celebrities that were in the show at that time. You were competing for space on stage. And, you know, everybody would go over their little routine. And you just had written in the script, Basil Brush routine. We'd come with it all pre-worked out what we were going to do. You just sort of slot it in those days and do your routines, if you know. You know, so the scripts were very slim. There wasn't a great deal to them, but we filled them all out with our shows. And they were great. They were massive affairs. They were big.
Would you have ever wanted to have been a leading man?
I'm not sure I had the legs, because in those days the leading men were actually leading women, of course. You didn't have leading men. It's all changed nowadays. The leading men are leading men. and the leading ladies. So you always had two ladies, you know. It was Anita Harris was always the one with the best leading lady. She was the best leading man, should I say, with the longest legs. But I didn't think I had the legs for it. I always liked to play the comic, you know, which is what I've done several times now in more recent times. I would always play the funny man or do something silly or play like the policeman, you know, in Aladdin, and have a sidekick who can do all the dirty work. And I would just sit there behind the counter because I couldn't move very far, if you know what I mean.
Would you ever consider sharing a joke book with people these days? Because I know there's been Basil Brush joke books over the years.
Well, yes. I mean, funnily enough, there have been all these Zoom meetings recently, and I tried to set up behind my good self a very good background, and I set up my books with the Tim Vine joke book I had there, a Penguin book of top joke books, and Dostoevsky's Art of Acting. It's just so that people would be having a little look and think, how clever, look at the diverse reading that Basil has got on his bookshelf there. And I'm sure actually a Basil Brush joke book, but you know what? All the jokes are the same. We just recycle them. You know, somebody says, I've heard that joke before. And I go, well, yes, I'm saving the planet. I'm recycling. You know, so yes, you'll have heard all the jokes before, but I bring them again. And of course, you've got to remember the kids that are coming to the pantomime. They're understanding language for the first time. So they've never heard those jokes before. You know, what do you call a deer with no eyes? No idea. Boom, boom. And they love it because they're sort of understanding language for the first time, if you know what I mean. And of course the grown-ups go, oh, I've heard that one before. And of course they did. They heard it 50 years earlier. But we're recycling, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel, because for kids falling on their bottoms, green pies in the faces, and silly jokes where they're just beginning to understand how language works and how you can have a double entendre or something, that's why we keep those old jokes in there. It's for the kids.
We love the old jokes.
We love the old jokes. I love silly poems. I love play on words. Particularly, I mean, we do a routine in the pantomime with Mr. Martin, based on Abbott and Costello, how they used to do Who's on First Base, where we have delivering letters, Mr. Who's in the first house, Mr. What's in the second, and Mr. Y's in the third. You know, who, what, where, why. And it gets very complicated. And I love play on words like that. Or I love doing silly poems like, Mary had a little lamb, she called it Silly Billy. She threw it up in the air and caught it by it. Stop that, Basil. You know, and just let everybody finish it off, and it goes over the heads of the children, most of the children. And if they do understand it, they think it's terribly naughty. And the parents go, oh, they laugh because the kids have got it as well. So that's the sort of humour that I like. A little bit of innuendo, but nothing rude, nothing rude.
Good. Back home then, when you go back to your home.
Yes. Yes.
Who's at home with you?
Just my good self. I mean, wherever I lay my brush, that's normally my home, because I'm normally touring or something like that. Or if I'm at Windsor, I'm just going through the bins of the palace. No, there's only just me. I can't tie myself to one girl because I can't do knots, if you know what I mean. You know, but Kylie Minogue, I met her at Glastonbury last year. I mean, we would go together because we could all get into the same clothes with the same size, 2.5. So, you know, two foxes together, and I could get into her hot pants and she could get into my sort of like flashy, sparkly wear. So yes, no, there's nobody there, unless you're offering.
What has been your favourite pantomime to perform in then?
Oh, my word. Now you're asking me the million-dollar question. It's normally the pantomime I'm in that year, because every time you do a pantomime, everybody goes, this is the best pantomime we've ever done. It's the best pantomime I've ever been in. This is the best show, the best cast, the best this, the best music, the best that. So I think we have short-term memories. It's always the last one that I've done is normally the best one. You have large, exciting ones. And in recent years, since 2000, when I came back on CBBC, you know, I have memorable ones like doing the Birmingham Hippodrome with Brian Conley and having live animals on the stage. And that was the pantomime I did the least in, I think. I remember Brian is so fantastic. People do come to see Brian, and he's so full of all the variety acts and his routines. You know, I didn't come on for 40 minutes, so the audience were warmed up, and I did a bit, and then did a bit in the second half. So I like to be busier than that, but that was one of the biggest recent pantomimes. It was massive, a massive kudos one. They certainly know, you know, where to chuck the money in to make it look spectacular. And Brian is an absolute pro. So I sit there at the side and say, oh, I'll borrow that gag. That's a good one. You know, he's got a good joke there. But he was magnificent with horses and everything on the stage. It was huge. So that was a spectacular one. A great one was with Biggins down at the Theatre Royal, Plymouth. I'd done 3 with him as the Dame. Huge personality that he is. And we work very well together. But I've got to tell you, my favourite pantomimes that I do are at the Theatre of Windsor. And there's a reason for that. Windsor, I'll be going back there, if we go back this year, for my 7th year. They want the audience to get to know their cast and to love their cast and get to know what they're going to do. And they go crazy in anticipation of waiting for you to come on the stage. We have a great writer in Stephen Blakely. We've got a great comic in Martin Cabell-Reid that I tour with as well. And we've become a great double act. And the audiences, we get to know the audiences and what they want. They always want 12 Days of Christmas. They always want Basil to do his boom boom kids, boom boom Basil. They all shout back, and they are waiting for you. And they book up as soon as they walk out the door. They book up for the following year. So you get to know the audience, you get to know the people backstage, you get to know the front of house people, and actually that has become my pantomime home, and I love it. It would take an awful lot. It would take going to the Palladium to take me away from there. I'd love to go back. I have to say, it's been 50 years since I was at the Palladium. I'd love to go back and do a Palladium. But I love the shows they do at Windsor. They're small scale, written specifically for the cast. Every year it's a unique script. So that's what I look forward to. And I love, and also I can go across to the Palace and rummage through the bins. You know, they're rather splendid as well, is to go through the Palace bins. So, and I was actually at the Theatre of Windsor watching pantomime there about 30 years ago. And I thought, oh, this is a wonderful. I went to see Ernie Wise there 30 years ago. And it was a lovely, small, but honest production. And I've got to say, I do love that. I do love that.
During the year then, what do you do to relax?
Have a jacuzzi. Sometimes I put water in it. Natural jacuzzis are best. You eat cans of baked beans and let nature take its course. I'm a keen golfer. I find I'm touring a lot. So I go on the golf course. Sometimes I'm mistaken for a clubhead cover, so I have to be very careful about that. But me and Tiger Woods one day we'll be walking the links. So I play a lot of golf. I play at the Richmond Golf Club with lots of fellow actors. You'll be likely to be down there with Scott Gorham from Thin Lizzy. He's a keen golfer. Alice Cooper, and in fact only the other day Tom Cruise landed his helicopter there and walked out. He was genuinely there at the golf club. He doesn't play, just went for something to eat. He's filming some big movie that I couldn't be in. But I realised that he's just the same size as me, so I could have a possibility in the future of doing movies. Since he's got away with it, he's only as tall as Kylie.
How's your lockdown been then? Because you mentioned you've been doing lots of Zoom.
Yeah, lockdown started by creating a lot of content for YouTube and stuff and writing some silly box set songs. That was a lot of fun. And then got a lot of requests to do messages for kids in hospitals, because I support several charities. And, of course, they're suffering as well. So could we raise awareness that they are still there? So I was doing messages for the kids in hospitals, messages to support the nurses. I would do Zoom meetings with kids in wards and to have a little hello and to cheer them up and to make them feel good. And then started doing quizzes for Marie Curie as well, hosting their online quizzes, and that raised £100,000 for them. And several other charities, the Shooting Star Hospice. Been doing messages for those and messages of support, raising awareness to try and get donations for them. And then most recently for the thing called the Smiling Charity, which has been making songs for care homes. They've got lots of celebrities to sing songs from the past, because music is so evocative that they could get, the residents would raise money and buy iPads so that they could hear songs of old from this organisation that specialised in going into care homes, but they weren't allowed to go in. So I was approached, so I've done several songs for them now that are featured on their, they're called the Smiling Sessions, and that they are in care homes. So I've actually been quite busy doing an awful lot. So, I've not been raising any money for myself, but I've been raising it for other people, and I said they can have my time free of charge. For anybody, I may not have 2 pennies to rub together at the moment. I'm a furloughed fox like everybody else. However, you can have my time. That costs me nothing.
You've had so many companions over the years as well.
Yes, many misters.
Many misters. How did the misters come about then?
Well, one always needs. It's like the classic double act of Morecambe and Wise, Cannon and Ball. There's always got to be a fall guy. There's always got to be someone who sets up the joke so that someone can have the payoff. And I'm just the same. I just happen to be a talking fox, and obviously sometimes my movements can be slightly restricted. So to have someone who can go and fetch and carry for me, basically a sidekick that can stand at my side and I can kick them if they're not doing the job properly. That's what I want. And I've had occasionally a few misses as well. I'm going to be working soon with Miss Judy. She's going to be my miss. So, I'm moving forward. I can have a mister, a miss. I can have anything you like, really. It's a sidekick who can stand at my side and, well, we'll kick each other if we're getting the jokes wrong or not getting the words right. So I've always had a sidekick, and it started with the Mr. Derricks and the Mr. Roys. And the interesting thing is, as I go and do things like the Edinburgh Festivals and the Glastonburys, I see this age group developing in front of me of children at the front, some 20-year-olds that grew up with me on the CBBC. And then this whole generation that grew up with from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s with their misters. And they go, I grew up with you, I grew up with you, I grew up with you. And I can age people by the mister that they grew up with. I can tell how old you are. I say, don't tell me, who was your mister? And I can say, you're in your 50s, you were the 60s, you're the 20-somethings, that grew up with Mr. Stephen, Mr. Barney Harwood from Blue Peter. So I've transcended the whole generations. I'm rather proud of that, actually, that I sort of go, wow, the kids are still growing up with me. Now I'm creating content for YouTube. It's not so easy to get on things like BBC and ITV anymore, but actually we're okay because we've got YouTube and a digital platform of our own that we can say, here we are. So when I go and do my live shows and things, I say, come up and see us on YouTube because we've got shows there, and all my CBBC shows are on YouTube at the moment as well, so they can see all the stuff that we've created in 2000. So I'm quite a lucky fox that I'm still here, just like the song from Follies. Good times and bum times, I've seen them all, and my dear, I'm still here.
Could you ever see Basil becoming a bit of a villain at some point?
A villain, funnily enough, they did ask us to be the villain in a pantomime a couple of years ago, but I just can't be nasty, I know they say, be an actor, and I go, no, I want to be cheered at the end. I don't want to be booed. Me and booze don't go together. I'm teetotal. Boom, boom. So no, teetotal, and then dunk me ginger nuts.
Are we okay to talk about Mr. Ivan?
Mr. Ivan. Mr. Ivan you might describe as my creator. I think of myself as like Pinocchio. That I've now become a real fox. Mr. Ivan was my mentor and my creator. And without him, I wouldn't have words, I wouldn't have life. But yes, he's the unsung hero. The unseen hero, who is no longer with us, sadly. And to prove that Pinocchio lives, I'm still going. And he cast me free and let me go. But without Mr. Ivan Owen, the unseen, unrecognised, unthanked person who created me, I would not be here. So yes, thanks to Ivan, and I'm still here. A real-life talking fox.
What's next then for Basil?
Well, who knows? Like everybody, we were just waiting for these great announcements from those very clever people in London as to whether we'll be able to go ahead with live shows indoors. At the minute, I'm touring around the country doing live shows outdoors, doing as many as we can. This was going to be one of our busiest years for many years, with the success of Edinburgh last year with the grown-up show that I do now. And we were going back to Edinburgh to go into a bigger theatre. We were doing Glastonbury again, the Isle of Wight Festival. We had a theatre tour completely organised. And it was going to be very exciting. So, no, the rug has been well and truly pulled from underneath me. But do you know what? I'm healthy. I haven't even got the flu. I haven't caught a cold. Occasionally have mange, but that's another story. But, we're still going, and I'm still very excited. And who knows what's round the corner. Whatever it will be, we will go with it.
Has there ever been a time that you found it challenging in pantomime?
No, pantomime is fun. Challenging when sometimes you're not feeling very well and you've got to do 3 show days. Because what people don't realise about pantomime is that it's a marathon. You do your rehearsals, then you do your late night tech that goes on till about 11:30, and then you open. And then suddenly you're doing 2 shows every single day, bar 1 a week. And then, if you're at Windsor and some theatres, you do 3 show days. And then you start to lose coordination. Then you get to Christmas and you go, flipping heck, this is now getting a bit tiring, and the throat's getting a bit tired and a bit sore. And then you get a really good audience, and that's effortless to do a really good audience. That's easy. And then you have Christmas, and you end up performing all day at Christmas because all the family come round and you open all your Christmas presents and you watch the telly. So it's not a rest day. And then you have 3 shows on Boxing Day. And of course, the audience only comes to you for the first time. So you've got to be full on, full out, 10 o'clock in the morning. And they don't realise that you might have got a bit of a tickly throat, you've got a headache, or, you know, you haven't eaten properly because you can't get out because the shows run back to back. And that's when the marathon begins to kick in. I call it, you get to having done several marathons, you get to the 16-mile marker halfway and you're okay. But then the last 2 or 3 weeks, it's like running the last 10 miles of the marathon. It really does become hard work physically. You're drained. But Dr. Footlight's up there as soon as the audience are there and they cheer when you come on the stage. Isn't it funny? You just go into automatic pilot and you can get through that show whether you're practically on your deathbed. You will give the show of your life and then go and collapse in the dressing room for half an hour with a cup of tea, dunk your ginger nuts again and go, right, here we go again. It's difficult to tell sometimes where you are. And I learned a lesson from the wonderful Keith Checkman because I do Easter pantomimes. You know, there are Easter pantomimes as well.
Yes.
I do my Easter pantomimes. And I did 3 with Keith Checkman, who was not very well. However, he could hardly walk up the steps at the side of the stage. But once he went on the stage, it was as if he'd gone back 20 years. His energy levels, everything. He would come off stage gasping for air and struggling. And then he would go on to his next entrance and he was totally professional. And sadly, you know, he is no longer with us. But, you know, you learn that lesson. It's amazing what Dr. Footlights can do. You get out there in front of the audience and you come alive.
What would be your advice to young up-and-coming foxes and other animals within the business?
Up-and-coming foxes and animals, write down every joke that you hear that you think is good. Make yourself a little Bible of all the best jokes, some of the best things, some of the best lines that people give to the children. Pace yourself. It's an awfully long career that you've got, and pace yourselves on day 1 of rehearsals as well. You don't have to be full out on day 1 because you've got an awful long way to go to save it for the opening night. So, you know, I hold a little bit back for that. Admire and watch the people that are established. I mean, I'll go and watch Brian Connolly and I admire his comedy timing all the time. It's absolutely stupendous. He's absolutely brilliant. And learn from the people that you're working alongside. And if they make a suggestion or they give you something to help you, take it on board. And yes, take their advice. They've been around for years, and that, you know, you learn from them. That's how we used to do it in the olden days. We would watch somebody on the stage and learn from how they handle a difficult audience. How do you handle an audience that's not giving you anything back? How do you handle an audience that's going raucous and you're told you can't go over time? That sort of thing. So yes, learn from your fellow artists is what I'd say.
Who do you like then to watch, apart from, obviously, you've mentioned Mr. Brian Connolly?
Mr. Brian Connolly, a lot of comics. And also I'll watch young comics to see how they're doing it. Sometimes it might be saying, oh, I wouldn't do that. Or you go, wow, that's new. That's, you know, especially new people can bring an awful lot of young energy to a piece and see how they're doing something and take that. I will learn from them as well. Learn new ideas and things like that. Directors, always learn from a director. I'll always do that. And then watch great comedy greats. I like watching the old movies, you know, and see how they behave and how they handle an audience as well. You know, Bob Hope and that sort of, they're brilliant with a great large crowd. But then there's an interesting thing when you have a small crowd one day and you just go, it's a completely different show because you're not getting anything back. Or you've got a crowd that is just full of 5-year-olds. Completely different show. And you've got to know how to change and adapt to that. Or you've got a very grown-up audience. Again, you've got to adapt your show to that grown-up audience as well. You know, sometimes I'll whip lines out, you know, as long as the cue lines are the same. And other things, they might be whipped out, you know, depending on how the show. Or we go very fast. We go very fast and get over it and flash over it.
Well, this leads me on to my very last question for
Is
you.
it?
Your dream pantomime. You can be in it,
Yes.
You can choose the production.
Yes.
You can choose the theatre, and your cast and crew can be alive or dead.
Oh my word, can be alive or dead. I think you've got to have Anita Harris, although I did work with Anita Harris last year at Windsor. She's an absolute pride. Love to have her as a principal boy, just to see how she does it. Even though people say, oh, that's very old-fashioned now, we don't do that. She would be absolutely fantastic to have. Brian Connolly, I love to work along Brian Connolly, but he's got letting me do a little bit more. And I'd have the script written by Mr. Stephen Blakely. I'd like to work alongside Mr. Martin Cabell-Reid because I love his energy. Fairies. Now, this is an interesting one. Fairies. Because I've worked with many fairies in the profession. And I'm not meaning that as a double entendre. I'm talking about the two best fairies I've ever come across. One is Bernie Nolan. The other one was Denise Pearson. It was fantastic at the Theatre Royal Windsor. Two very complete opposites of performance, but my goodness me, they were fantastic fairies. And it's very sad that Bernie is no longer with us, and I felt at one point that I was killing off fairies because I did Linda Bellingham the following year and she went as well, and I thought, flipping it, don't work with me. I've died on stage several times, but if you stick with me, mate. And then Keith Checkman, I said, you're not going to last very long. But Denise Pearson, what a singer, and I don't think I've ever come across, so she would be my fairy now because she's still alive, to sing Act 1 out is Denise Pearson singing anything she likes, because she was stupendous, and I would love to get Denise Pearson back. Would be good. Anne Hegarty is a great baddie. She's one that you would never expect to be so nasty, but also so loved by the audience. So I love working with Anne. She is. Jason Gardner is another very good baddie. Wonderfully talented, great singer, great dancer. He would be great to have in a cast, playing anything really. The dame I would love to have worked with is John Inman. Although I did work with him in Richmond in 2004, sadly he didn't make it onto the stage. He wasn't terribly well, he couldn't let go of the gin and tonic, and his understudy, who has been with him for years, called Malcolm Lord, went on in his behalf. And the funny thing is, the audience didn't recognise that it wasn't Mr. Inman, because he was so good at being John. And John sadly passed away. However, Malcolm inherited the costumes, and even nowadays goes out as pantomime dame in his own right, and he's quite magnificent, I've got to say, with John's old costumes. But I'd have loved to have seen John in his prime on stage and worked with him, so that would have been a great thing to have done, and have been John Inman. And of course me in the lead role as Buttons,
Of course.
in Cinderella, at the Palladium.
At the Palladium.
At the Palladium, after it's transferred from Windsor.
Of course.
It's transferred from Windsor because I love Windsor.
And are you going to be helping with the ticket sales as well? And
Well, we might have to, because you never know who's left working in sorts of places now, do you? So I don't know. So we're doing our best. So yes, pantomime, we hope, will go ahead, and it'll be boom, boom, kids, boom, boom, Basil.
Basil, thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been brilliant, and I'm going to go and get a cup of tea and dump my ginger nuts.
The Panto